I'm going to make a bold statement. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to identify noble grape varieties just by using your palate and what's in the glass. Don't believe me? We'll see. Continuing with the crayon analogy, this lecture will cover the red noble grape varieties, adding to the colors that you know. Remember from our last lecture that a grape is said to be noble if it has these criteria: grown in a variety of climates outside its indigenous environment, retains its unique character despite where it's grown, capable of making high-quality wine, ages well, and shows a sense of place. The noble grapes are also among the most popular grape varieties that you'll see. Once you understand these varieties, it will make it much easier to explore wine-growing regions in later lectures. Again, in this lecture, you'll be needing the following wines: a Bourgogne Rouge, or a New World Pinot Noir. We have here a New Zealand Pinot Noir. A Northern Rhone Syrah. Here we have a Gros Hermitage, but you may find an Hermitage, a Saint-Joseph, or a Côte Rôtie. A basic Bordeaux, meaning it just says Bordeaux on the label, or you can find a California Merlot, provided that it's predominantly Merlot, and a Chilean Cabernet Sauvignon. Perhaps you don't think red wine is for you because you get headaches. To address this, I'd like to go back to Napa to talk with Master of Wine Patrick Farrell, who's also a specialist in internal medicine.
Usually headaches from wine is from drinking too much wine. Okay? As we know, anybody who drinks too much alcohol gets dehydrated, and the next day you feel terrible and can have a headache. Though there's a subset of people who are very sensitive to wine, particularly red wine, and they can get headaches from drinking as little as a glass or two of red wine.
And what is that from? Is it the sulfites? Is it histamines? What is it from?
It turns out that it's not sulfites, and it's histamines, but not histamines in the wine, which doesn't make sense. It turns out that red wine can cause a release of histamines from within your body, and people who are predisposed get headaches. Sometimes having a little bit of an antihistamine before having the red wine can cut down on the risk of those headaches, though people have to be careful about the combination of alcohol and an antihistamine.
For today's lecture, we have a wide range of styles here, from light-bodied and aromatic to rich, full-bodied wines with gripping tannins. So let's start at one end of the spectrum. Pinot Noir. Winemakers call it the headache grape. Growers hate it, winemakers agonize over making it, and we love it. Rarely do you see a grape variety that is capable of such perfume, such finesse, such elegance, yet such power. Pinot Noir enchants us all. It's even one of the varieties that's used to make vintage champagne, which also demonstrates its quality. Pinot Noir prefers cool climates and refuses to show its best unless it's in the right temperature, right soil, right sunlight. Pinot Noir is thin-skinned, so it's susceptible to fungal disease and suffers if you manhandle it too much. But even suffers from air sickness. You know, when you fly someplace and you ever suffer from air sickness, Pinot Noir suffers from air sickness. What happens is the aromas shut down, meaning you can't smell anything, and it actually has to rest before the bottle of Pinot Noir comes back to life, showing its beautiful aromas. I mean, not like Cab. Cab you can kick across the country and nothing's going to happen to it. Pinot Noir is the highest maintenance grape. A grape like Chardonnay, for example, is so much easier. Remember Genevieve from Robert Mondavi Winery talking about how rain was much less of a concern for Chardonnay? Not so for Pinot Noir. This is why winemakers who make Pinot Noir qualify themselves as more highly skilled than others, because the grape is so difficult to manage well. It also explains why it isn't easy to find a Pinot Noir for under $10. But winemakers allow Pinot Noir to make these demands because of how high the quality can get. It also has quite the heritage. Pinot Noir is one of the oldest cultivated vines in existence, having gone from a wild vine to domestic about 2,000 years ago. There are indications that Pinot Noir was grown in Burgundy back to the 4th century, but the first written records that we have take us back to 1375. But even then, they knew the quality of Pinot Noir, as Philippe the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy, ordered that Pinot Noir be planted throughout the Côte d'Or over the inferior grapes. It is still the only red grape there today, as we will discuss in Lecture 11. Here we have a New Zealand Pinot Noir. It originated in Burgundy. Anything that says Bourgogne Rouge on the bottle means that it's made from Pinot Noir. In Europe, or what we call the Old World, they put the names of the places on the label instead of the grape varieties, which is what you see everywhere outside of Europe, meaning the New World. Now, let's take a look, rather, at our Pinot Noir glass. Now you tilt it over your napkin, your white surface, and you see that it's a very, very pale color. It's a pale core and an even paler rim. Pinot Noir is a very thin-skinned grape variety, which means it also has less pigmentation or anthocyanins in its skin. Unlike Cab, where it has much thicker skin and much more color pigmentation. Now pick up your glass and just look at the color difference between these two. It's quite striking. Now let's take a look at the aromatics of Pinot Noir, and we'll do our chest, chin, and nose test. Actually, I can smell it a little bit right here. Even more there. And when you stick your nose in the glass, you get a beautiful array of red berry flavors, aromas, I should say. So strawberries, cranberries, cherries, but they're all red fruits. Let's taste the wine. And again, take about a tablespoon or so in your mouth to really roll it around your tongue. Now for a red grape variety, Pinot Noir generally tends to be at the lighter end of the spectrum. Remember our skim milk, whole milk, and heavy cream analogy. This is probably more towards the skim milk end of the spectrum. And its range can go towards, somewhere around whole milk 2%. But it generally likes cool climates, Pinot Noir, just like Riesling, and we discussed earlier. But as we had discussed in Lecture 3, cooler climates yield lighter body wines with higher acid and not as much alcohol, as opposed to, let's say, Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah that have a much higher level of alcohol because they grow in much warmer climates. However, there is one characteristic that makes Pinot Noir one of the best, if not the best food and wine pairing red. It's its high acidity. The acidity in Pinot Noir can be moderately high or quite high, but it's generally noticeable. You may have heard pairing red meat with red wine, and you only pair fish with white wine. However, Pinot Noir can go incredibly well with salmon because its high acid can cleanse the tongue from the fattiness of the fish, similar to what the Sancerre had done for me. And it's absolutely gorgeous with pork. Pork is a lighter meat, and Pinot Noir really complements the pork with its strawberry, cranberry, and red cherry flavors. Besides being an incredible food pairing wine, Pinot Noir's relative high acidity allows it to age for decades, providing that the other elements, fruit, alcohol, and tannin, are perfectly in balance to do so. Now let's taste the Pinot Noir versus the Cabernet Sauvignon. Now we remember what the Pinot Noir tasted like. We've got that. And now go back to the Pinot Noir. I asked you to do this to check out the wine's tannins. Remember, tannin is that drying sensation, that almost tactile sensation you get from drinking red wines. Now, when you went to the Cabernet Sauvignon, you probably noticed a much more intense amount of drying and much more tactile sensation. And then when you went back to the Pinot Noir, it was almost like falling into a pillow. It's very, very soft. So Pinot Noir has very, very supple tannins. Now, Pinot Noir, in its delicacy and its finesse, has the ability to easily show a sense of place. Now, my first job in the industry was with a company called the Burgundy Wine Company, and I worked there for about 10 months, but every day I worked there, we had an opportunity to taste Burgundy, or Pinot Noir, from Burgundy every day. Now, by the end of the 10 months, I was able to tell you the difference between the regions of Chambord-Musigny as well as Moret-Saint-Denis. Now, these are two regions that are very, very close to one another, but they have many different types of microclimates, these little pockets of terroir, which we'll discuss later, that made the wine taste totally different. So Pinot Noir really shows where it's from through its aromatics and its structure. On to the next noble grape, Syrah. Now, if you didn't know, Syrah and Shiraz are exactly the same grape variety, just different names. It's one of the biggest crowd pleasers among grape varieties, and for people who don't like red wine, tell them to try a Shiraz. All of a sudden, they're wine drinkers. So where did it come from? We hear many legends about the origin of Syrah and Shiraz. Some say it was planted by one of the Crusaders on a hill in Hermitage in the Rhone Valley, where the chapel of St. Christopher now stands. Rhone Valley is in France. Others say the grape was named after the city of Shiraz in ancient Persia. Okay, so although I'd like to believe the legends because they're just so romantic, Syrah is indigenous to the northern Rhone Valley, so it is a little bit more boring, the actual story. Now, Syrah is a fairly thick-skinned grape. But unlike other noble grape varieties, Syrah has a tolerance for both hot climates and cool climates, which is why you see it increasingly all over the world. Because of this, it has the ability to get inky black, as in Hermitage, or more moderately ruby, as you'll see with some moderately priced Southeast Australian Shiraz. Let's take a look at the color of the Pinot Noir that we just tasted versus the Syrah, because here we have a Gros Hermitage. Already you see immediately that this is a thicker skinned grape variety because it's just much deeper. Now let's smell it. I don't get too much there. I definitely get something at my chin. And when you put your nose in the glass, Syrah is known for having a very raspberry kind of aroma. Think of red raspberries. And a lot of times when you see it in the Rhone Valley where it's from, you get this huge amount of herbs because in the Rhone Valley, it's surrounded by all of these herbs like rosemary and lavender. But sometimes you get a little bit of violet as well. Now, unlike other grape varieties, there is a spice element to the grape variety. Sometimes you see spice element because it's linked to the oak. But for this, just the grape variety by itself, it has a black pepper kind of aroma. And sometimes it can take on aromas of smoke. Now let's taste our Syrah or Shiraz. You'll notice that it's much more warm in the mouth. I actually literally mean warm. It's a thermal reaction that's happening in your mouth. And the reason why it's happening is not only because of the spice that you're getting, but really it's more having to do with the alcohol level. Now, on every bottle, they have the alcohol listed. And because Syrah in the Rhone Valley is much warmer than what you see for Pinot Noir, you're going to notice a higher level of alcohol. So that's where that warming sensation comes from. Also, you'll notice that the tannin is a little bit stronger than the Pinot Noir, but it's not anywhere near to the grip level of Cabernet Sauvignon. But this totally depends on the different terroir that it comes from. And Syrah can be a total chameleon, showing a different sense of place depending on where it's grown. Now, in the industry, there are two general styles for this grape, the Syrah style and the Shiraz style. The Syrah style reminds us of the style created in the northern Rhone Valley with its herbal, floral, peppery, smoky. I mean, the fruit is still there, but it's more integrated with the other flavors. It's a little more subdued because it's from the old world. Its Australian cousin, Shiraz, it's really bold and upfront and obvious in its fruit. And the spicy, smoky notes are playing best supporting actors. You may appreciate both styles or prefer one over the other, but it's good to know both styles when speaking to a sommelier in a restaurant or to a retail staff in a store. Now on to Merlot. It's an incredibly popular grape variety and competes with Cabernet Sauvignon as one of the most popular red grapes in the world. Its name derives from the word for blackbird in French, or merle. These birds have been known to steal these sweet grapes throughout Bordeaux, where the grape originated. Merlot got a boost from the French paradox the 60 Minutes show in 1991 we mentioned in Lecture 1. However, after the movie Sideways came out, Merlot saw quite a dip in sales because it became less fashionable to drink. Poor Merlot. It's lived in the shadow of King Cabernet, but Merlot makes some of the most beautifully luscious, rich, and concentrated wines in the world. It's the #1 red grape planted in Bordeaux, and it's now planted anywhere from Chile to Bulgaria. It's popular and can make wines priced from $2 Chuck to Petrus, whose 2000 vintage is going for approximately $3,000 per bottle, and which undoubtedly will last for decades. A thick-skinned grape variety, Merlot can get quite dark, and the example that you have may be darker than the Cabernet Sauvignon that you have. Now let's take a look at the Merlot versus the Cabernet Sauvignon. They're both pretty fairly dark, although I have to say that the ones that I have, the Merlot is paler in color to the Cabernet Sauvignon. And this is generally very typical. Now, when you smell it, the chest, not getting too much there. Chin, a little bit, but this is one you're probably going to have to stick your nose in the glass. Now, Merlot has a very different profile in its fruit than Syrah or Cabernet Sauvignon. It's known for having more of a blackberry and plum and sometimes blue fruit type of tones, like blueberries, but generally blackberries and plums are the markers. There's also a unique flavor you get from, or at least I get from Merlot. It's called tar. Kind of like when we talked about diesel with Riesling, this is not a bad thing. Let's taste the Merlot to get a comparison on the palate. Now this is a little bit weightier than the Syrah that we had, but it's plush. It's got this texture, this velvety kind of texture it's really big on the mid-palate. And that's what Merlot is known for. It's actually more known for its texture than it is for its aromas. And this is what makes Merlot as you ever hear of comfort foods? Merlot is a comfort wine because of that texture. It can stand up to and be complemented by all different levels of oak. With new oak, it gets a really chocolatey texture with very strong notes of vanilla, spice, and toast, especially in the region of Saint-Emilion on the right bank of Bordeaux, which we'll discuss later in Lecture 10. Now, in warm climates, Merlot can get a quite juicy and blackberry jam-like note, and in mild climates in Europe, it can show a higher acidity and a mineral undertone, which is what I got when I tasted this Bordeaux. However, Merlot's acid is generally lower than the other noble grape varieties, which is why it adds a softness and a plushness that I was talking about in the mid-palate, especially when blended with Cab. Now, Ozzie Clarke may be right when he calls Merlot the eternal bridesmaid to Cabernet. However, Cabernet Sauvignon needs Merlot. It fills some of the palate gaps for Cabernet. For example, we talked about that plush mid-palate and weight Merlot has. When blended with Cab, it can bring a longer balance to the wine and soften Cab's big brother tannins. Now we come to the biggest noble red grape variety, King Cabernet Sauvignon. It's very likely the most popular red grape variety on the planet, and it's easy to see why. It's a Ford pickup truck, a Harley Davidson, or Lamborghini, depending on where it's grown and handled. It's the most masculine of the grapes. I say this because it's not delicate. It's rich, it's gripping, it takes hold of your palate and doesn't give it back. However, in its classic areas, it's not without its elegance. So think of a James Bond in a tuxedo versus the voluptuousness of a Marilyn Monroe, that is Merlot, or an Audrey Hepburn, that is Pinot Noir. It originated in Bordeaux from its mother and father grapes. DNA testing has revealed that the parents of Cabernet Sauvignon are in fact Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc, both indigenous to Bordeaux. Cabernet Sauvignon can take hot climates as well as marginal ones. However, when in cool climates, the flavors are too green and underripe. It's a late ripening grape variety, which means it takes longer to ripen Cab than other grapes, so it's generally the last picked. And it takes a long time to ripen those thick-skinned and tightly clustered grapes. Now, in appearance, Cabernet Sauvignon is always rich in color. This is because it's a thick-skinned grape variety, but it can be very inky black, or it can be deep ruby and only slightly opaque. Picking up our Cabernet Sauvignon glass, when you tilt the glass, in order to see how opaque it is, you probably should put your fingers behind it in order to see it. Now, can you see it? Now, I can barely see my fingers with this Cabernet Sauvignon, so that really does tell you that it's a thick-skinned variety. And we compared it to Pinot Noir before, so if you need to see it again, the color contrast is striking. Now, let's smell. I don't smell anything there. I actually smell quite a bit here. Because this is from the New World, this is from Chile, the fruit is very, very obvious. I'm going to swirl it to get some more aromas around. Wow. Cabernet Sauvignon is known for a particular fruit. We don't see this a lot in the United States, but it's black currant. When I was living in London, they have these little kids' juicy sips, you know, the ones with a little straw, and they had black currant juice for children, and it was called Ribena. And I remember getting these just so that I could understand what black currant tastes like. It's very, very rich in its fruit, and it's concentrated, but there's always this little element of greenness. However, sometimes you can get that kind of aroma by tasting cassis or crème de cassis. We see a lot of that in this country, so if you want to know what the flavor is like, you can get some crème de cassis. Now, I mentioned that Cab has parents, Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc. And while it has more strength in tannins than its father, Cabernet Franc, it also has that herbaceous note that it shares with Sauvignon Blanc. Remember, the chemical responsible for this is methoxypyrazine, which I mentioned in lecture 2. Now, if you have your Le Nez de Vin set, get out the bottle for green bell pepper, or do this test. Take a green bell pepper from your refrigerator, cut it open, and smell it. Can you remember that smell? Now walk away for a little bit and just breathe. And then I want you to go back to your Pinot Noir glass, smell your Pinot Noir, and you get all of that beautiful strawberry cherry fruit, but go to your Cabernet Sauvignon. Do you get any of that herbaceous or greenness now? I mean, you may not, because some people have a hard time smelling this chemical, but it's this green note that I get whenever I taste Cab, and it helped me identify Cabs in the MW exam. Now let's taste the Cabernet. I really want you to roll that around your tongue, because if you haven't already felt tannin, I really want you to get it all over your tongue. It's a very tactile, velvety sensation, but it's drying. And if you wait maybe about 10 seconds, you'll feel kind of the saliva leave your mouth. It's a very drying sensation. But if you're having trouble identifying, again, go back to the Pinot Noir and go to the Cabernet Sauvignon again. You'll feel how dry that is. Now, the tannins in Cabernet Sauvignon are quite high. It shows up in our glass as a dense, firm, gripping sensation. This is because its skin-to-pulp ratio is quite high. It's approximately 1 to 12. Now, you may not think that sounds high, but Semillon, another grape found in Bordeaux, has a ratio of 1 to 25. So Cab is approximately half of that. What this means is that the tannin from the skin and pips, or the seeds, is in a higher concentration when it's macerating with the must in the wine. One of Cab's best features is that it shows its characteristics, like black currant, strong tannin, full body, no matter where it's grown. But it also shows a sense of place. In Chile, it takes on a very herbaceous and almost minty type of tone, while on the left bank of Bordeaux, it smells of pencil shavings, violets, cedar, and cigar box. However, it always has that undertone of black currant and cassis. In terms of food pairing, Cabernet Sauvignon generally needs some food to go with it because of the strength of its tannins, but I see people drink it by itself all the time. Because of Cabernet Sauvignon Cabernet Sauvignon's full body and gripping tannin, it usually needs something rich in protein, such as a thick, juicy steak. Now, if you have some sliced roast beef from the deli, try this test. I want you to taste the cab, taste a little bit of that sliced roast beef, and then go back to the cab. What you're probably going to find is that the tannin in the Cabernet is much more supple and soft. The reason why this happens is that the protein in the roast beef reacts with the tannin and actually causes a chemical reaction where you perceive it as softer in your mouth. This is the reason why people say red meat with red wine or cheese with red wine, which is the reason why it combines with the tannins, and this is the reason why you put milk in tea. So whether you like the strength and power of Cabernet Sauvignon, or it's a bit too overbearing for you, one thing is for certain. Cabernet Sauvignon has earned its place. So King Cabernet, we bow to thee. But putting it all together, here is a cheat sheet chart that shows what we've explained here today. Notice how Pinot Noir is so intensely aromatic in comparison to the other grape varieties. And also notice how Cabernet Sauvignon is so rich in tannin. And you can see Merlot and Syrah kind of dance around that middle area. But these are some sweeping generalizations for this. Now for a quiz. We've gone through our 8 boxes of crayons, or should I say 7, for all the noble white and great red varieties. So I think you're up to the challenge. Here I have 2 mystery wines. So let's start with the white. We're going to look at the color. It's quite pale. And it's got some green hues to it. So now I'm going to do the chest, chin, nose test. Do I smell anything there? Oh, a little bit actually. Here, quite a bit. So it's very, very aromatic. And in the nose, it's positively pungent. So what does that tell you? That tells you it's a very aromatic grape variety, which rules out what? Yeah, it rules out non-aromatic grape varieties. And we only had one white non-aromatic grape variety that we showed you, which was Chardonnay. So chances are it's not Chardonnay, but let's look at the aromas. We'll swirl our glass, get all of those aromas out. I get lemon, I get some citrus notes. It's quite floral. It's actually got a bit of a tropical or passion fruit kind of aroma, but there's something there like a fresh cut grass. It's a very herbaceous tone. So let's take a sip. It's fairly light-bodied, and it has quite a bit of acid. So what do you think this is? So what do we have here? You guessed it, Sauvignon Blanc. It didn't exhibit the quite delicate body and types of aromas that we see in Riesling, nor did it have the weight and richness of a Chardonnay. And the fresh cut grass note is a total benchmark for Sauvignon Blanc. Here we have the Brancott Sauvignon Blanc. Now we're on to the red, our mystery red. I'm going to tilt the color. Take a look at the core versus the rim. This is probably a medium deep ruby. Here we have here. Notice a little bit of blue tones, so it's probably a youthful wine. But we're probably looking at a thick-skinned grape variety here, because as you look through it, it's slightly opaque, and if you put your fingers behind it, I can barely see them behind. Now we're going to chest, chin, nose. Wow, get a lot of dark fruit, so blackberry fruits and plum, but I also get an amount of vanilla, spice, and toast. What could this be? Now let's taste. Well, it's fairly dense. It's got soft, velvety tannins, and it's quite plush. It's luscious almost, and it's very, very ripe. And the acidity is moderate. It's kind of keeping it at bay. But I don't get any black pepper kind of aromas. So what could this be? You guessed it. It's Merlot. And this is the Frog's Leap Merlot. Now you should be very, very proud of yourself. We're only 1/4 of the way into this course, and you not only identified 2 wines just by what's in the glass, you now know you have your own markers to identify 7 grape varieties. Now, having this box of colors will allow you to see wines in a whole new way. We'll be using this information to make comparisons within regions and to other grape varieties that we'll see later on in other lectures. Next up, we venture into the world of bubbles. We look into the history, the production, and the tastes of sparkling wines. You'll need the following wines next time. You're going to need a non-vintage champagne. You're going to need a cava. You're going to need a California sparkling wine, a prosecco, a muscato d'asti, and a bracchetto. Now, sparkling wines are some of the most celebrated wines in the world, and those are most associated with luxury and sin. They're also among the most misunderstood. So don't miss it, because at the end of the show, I'm going to show you a very special way to open up a bottle of champagne. But until then, great job, and I'll see you next time.